G'day punters, time for another episode of Tales from the Toxic Boy Boomer. This one, it's about teaching actually, being taught and becoming a teacher, I guess you could say. So back there in the good old days in the late 50s, early 60s, I went to Turvey Park Demonstration School, and the reason it was called a demonstration school, every other school in Wagga was a primary school, but it was called Demonstration School because it was connected to Wagga Teachers College. And what used to happen is we'd get a whole heap of trainee teachers that would turn up once in a while. And the classrooms were actually big enough, or there were a couple of classrooms that were big enough that you could put chairs around the sort of outside, along the walls, or windows, and all the trainee teachers would sit there while our teacher, delivered a couple of lessons. So, that's what used to happen. And I'm pretty sure it might have been grade 5 or grade 6. Anyway, Mr. Gordon, he was grade 6. I think he might have had some trainee teachers there one time. And anyway, they used to turn up from Wagga Teachers College. And then one of them, or a couple of them, the trainees would come back, and then they'd be our teacher for however long, a couple of hours a day or a week or whatever. And they'd sort of that. And typical, we'd give them a bit of a hard time and stuff like that. But anyway, that was what used to happen. Now, my late mother was actually the secretary to the principal, Alan Hale, God rest his soul, of the Wagga Teachers College. And he got himself a rather interesting reputation because what he did was, and he did this like back in the early 60s, so you get these people these days taking all this claim for this fucking bullshit about literacy and numeracy, and we're doing this and doing that. Yeah, how about you acknowledge the bloody pioneers of this stuff? What he did was it was a primary school trainee place. They were all trained to be primary school teachers. So, yeah, and it actually, Wagga Teachers College became Charles Sturt University eventually. That's another story. And my mum moved out to the university as well as a secretary out there. But anyway, Alan Hale, he used to set exit exams for the graduates. One was literacy, one was numeracy. And if they didn't get out, then if they didn't go, pass these exit exams, they didn't graduate. Well, uproar from mum and dads, his kids, I remember my mum came home one day and she said, this mother's turned up, she's a precious little darling, she went to some private school or whatever, and blah, blah, blah. And Alan just sat there and said, no, she ain't leaving until she goes back and sorts out a literacy and numeracy. So, there you go. Now, back to the trainee teacher. I eventually became a teacher. This has sort of taken a few steps forward. And then, when I became a teacher, I resisted it for a few years, but I was at a Catholic boys' school in Sydney, and I agreed to take on a trainee teacher, all right? And because I was a math teacher at the time, so I took this young lady on as a trainee teacher, and she was bloody useless. But the problem was her dad owned a pub in Botany, Mascot, that used to supply the brothers with all their booze. So I had to be a little bit, diplomatic. I can remember the boss dragging me into Brother Ernie. He dragged me into his office. He didn't drag me, but he got me into the office and he said, "Look, we've got to get her through, right?" And I said, "She's bloody thick as a brick, mate. I wouldn't let her." He said, "Well, look, fair enough, but look, let's just play the game." And I thought, geez, this is the last time I'm doing this. So anyway, I had this year 8 class of boys, obviously. It was a sharp class. So the class was as sharp as a tack. Not every kid, but most of them, sharp as a tack. And this, whatever her name was, I can't remember her bloody name, she had to deliver a lesson. And the lesson was going to be, inspected by the supervisor. And I think they brought someone down from the OLSH girls' school to have a look as well. Because maybe they were looking to recruit her as a teacher, whatever. Anyway, blood is thicker than water, or whatever, when you're working with the Catholics. So anyway, I set the lesson up to her. I set it up and I said, and this is pretty much what happened. I said, all right, to whatever her name was, I said, this is what I'm doing. The sharp kids are sitting up the back, and the dopies are sitting up the front, right? So when you ask a question, if you want a right answer, ask a kid across the back and you'll get a right answer. And if you want a sort of not sure answer, so, then you've got to sort of teach a bit and show them what the right answer is, trick the kids across the front. So we set it all up, we're all there. I'm sitting up the back, but the kids all there, they were all cleared up, blah, 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 blah. So she teaches this lesson, right? And it was fractions. And I can't remember exactly what they were, but it was 2/5 times 5/8, I think it might have been. Let's say it was 2/5 times 5/8, right? And so she said, so what's the first thing we have to do? So one of the sharp kids stuck his hand up and said, you can cancel those 2 5s, miss. And she went, no. And to a boy, they all spun round this back row and looked straight at me, and my heart sank, and I thought, this thing is just going to absolutely go fucking pear-shaped. And sure enough, it did. She said, find the lowest common denominator. So one kid stuck his hand up at the front and made some stupid fucking remark, and it got even worse. And then the kids in the sharp row said, miss, we're multiplying, we're not adding, all right, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, the lesson completely collapsed, and I had to go at the front and do a bit of a rescue mission and stuff like that, righto? So anyway, that was it. Total friggin' chaos. And probably to this day, I put her through, and it was only because, yes, Wednesday afternoons, I'd go over to the brother's house and we'd knock back a couple of scotches, I must admit, and you played the game. And anyway, yeah, who would have thought? Trainee bloody teachers. Even when a bit later on I did my master's degree, and I can remember them saying they were training these primary school teachers, and I remember one of the professors at the Sydney University came into the staff room and had just done a tutorial, and he said, they're functionally illiterate. Hallelujah to that.